University Singers of Georgia Southern. How about a hand of appreciation? There, upward. Barry, can you turn me up a little? Thank you. Next Sunday starts God on Broadway. Oh, wow. Our 10th year. We started 11 years ago, but remember 2009 was the year we renovated the sanctuary, so we had our service in the social hall, so we didn't do God on Broadway that year. So this is our 10th anniversary year. We start with a little show called Les Miserables. And I think we have there's about 7 songs from Les Mis incorporated into the service. It's really going to be special. We encourage you to invite others to come worship with us. If each of you invite and get 2 people here next Sunday, we'll be in big trouble. But our ushers like the challenge. They want you to make them work next week. All right. Also, bring a little extra food for our big coffee hour, because we're going to have a lot of people to feed next Sunday. So bring food next Sunday and a little more than usual. As you know, this past June 17th, 9 people were shot and killed inside the Emmanuel AME, African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston. Soon after that tragic event, about 5 of us clergy in Savannah of various denominations decided we needed to have a special prayer service for the community. We felt it would be best if the service was held at an AME church, since that's the denomination of the church in Charleston. And we soon got word that St. Philip's AME over on Martin Luther King Boulevard would host a service on the 19th, 2 days after the shooting. About 7 of us clergy would be participating in the service. We would sit up front in the pulpit area, and each one of us would take turns offering a prayer during the service. Mayor Edna Jackson was there and offered remarks at the beginning of the service, as did our Mayor Pro Tem Van Johnson. Van was actually on double duty that day, as he was also playing the piano for the service. He's an excellent pianist, by the way, plays by ear. As the mayor and Van were offering their remarks to the congregation, I had a sudden idea. I decided that I would conclude my relatively short prayer by singing a couple of stanzas of Precious Lord, Take My Hand, the spiritual we just sang. So after Van spoke and as he started walking back to the piano, I realized that I should let the Mayor Pro Tem pianist know what I was doing in case he wanted to play along with me. So as he was walking by me, I quickly whispered in his ear, Van, I'm going into Precious Lord right after the prayer. And then Van whispered something back to me that was very impressive. He said, what key? In other words, Van can play it in any key, he plays by ear. But then I whispered something back into his ear that was equally impressive. I said, it doesn't matter. Now that may have sounded impressive, but what Van didn't know is that I don't read music. So I couldn't tell him what key to play it in. So I just said, whatever you play, I'll find it. All right? So after about halfway through the service, it's my turn to pray, and after I offer the prayer, I start singing, Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I'm tired, I'm weak, I'm worn. And I sang it a lot slower then. But back then, as I'm singing, something starts happening. Something really good. I had my eyes closed, but I could just feel the Spirit moving in a big way. As is the custom in many African American churches, especially in the South, congregations sometimes sing along with you when you offer such a singing prayer. And this was no exception. The congregation started singing with me, and the service just seemed to move to a different level. Then we had a couple of more prayers. And then Reverend Thurman Tillman, the great minister over at First African Baptist Church, brought it home with an incredible closing prayer and benediction. It was a great service, and it's something I will never forget. The next month, I find myself in Memphis, Tennessee. A couple of weeks ago, I shared with you that in July, Randy Kennedy, Tricia Richardson, and I drove to Memphis to attend a workshop at the Church Health Center because we're trying to learn more about how we as a faith community can be a better resource for health and wholeness. And I shared with you a couple of weeks ago that after a couple of days of workshop after workshop after workshop, we decided to have a little fun. We drove over to the Sun Records studio, the place where Elvis Presley and Johnny Cash were discovered, the place where Jerry Lee Lewis took rock and roll to a place it never dreamed of going. We had a blast. After the tour of the studio was over, I asked Randy and Tricia if we could go to one more place. I wanted to go to where Martin Luther King Jr. was taken from us. Dr. King was shot on the second floor of the Lorraine Hotel in Memphis just as he stepped out of his room. And you know, it only took us 3 minutes to drive from Sun Records to that location. It was so strange to be going from a place of great joy and creativity to a place of great sadness and destruction. And when we turned on the street, I couldn't believe it. I was only 8 years old when Dr. King was shot, but I remember seeing it on the news and seeing pictures of it, and I couldn't believe that the Lorraine Hotel looked exactly as it did in 1968. It was chilling. And it was even eerier when we got out of the van and stood in the parking lot of the hotel. We were standing right in between where Dr. King was slain and where the shooter had been. Eerie to be in the spot where such evil and such a cowardly act had taken place. The parking lot of the hotel is no longer used as a parking lot. It's part of the museum. The hotel is now part of the National Civil Rights Museum, which also uses a couple of adjacent buildings to the hotel. Well, throughout the parking lot are plaques with pictures of Dr. King and his friends and words telling about his life. We went over to all of the plaques, and then I went over to the plaque nearest the place on the balcony where Dr. King was shot and read about that tragic day. And as I read one of the last lines on the plaque, I was stunned. It said, Dr. King was shot at 6:01 p.m. on April 4th, 1968, and as he was standing on the motel's second floor balcony. It is said that Dr. King's last words on the balcony were to the musician Ben Branch, who was scheduled to perform that night at the event Dr. King was attending. Dr. King said, "Ben, make sure you play Take My Hand, Precious Lord tonight. Play it real pretty." Those were his last words. I had not known that. And it dawned on me that although I didn't know it, the majority of the people attending that prayer service at St. Philip's knew about it. Here we were in an African American church on Martin Luther King Boulevard, having a service because people were shot because they were African American, and I'm singing the song that Dr. King asked to have played just before he was shot. No wonder the spirit of the congregation went to a different level. They were experiencing something I wasn't experiencing because they knew something I didn't know. And I've since learned that Mahalia Jackson sang Precious Lord at Dr. King's funeral, and that Aretha Franklin sang it at the dedication of the King Memorial in Washington. Most of those folks at St. Philip's knew that. I didn't. You see, it's so interesting how the context, how our individual histories, our individual experiences, our individual knowledge can affect how we experience something, can affect what we believe, what we do, what we think, what we say. It also affects who and what we judge. Many of you are familiar with the story that Stephen Covey tells in his famous 7 Habits book. He was on a subway one Sunday morning in New York. Everyone was sitting quietly on that Sunday morning, some reading the paper, some sipping coffee, some taking a nap with their eyes closed. The subway stops at a station, the doors open, and in walks a man with 2 very rambunctious children, and they are very loud. And the man sits down by Stephen Covey and closes his eyes while his children yell back and forth. And then they start throwing things, even grabbing people's papers. It was very disturbing, and the man did nothing. And after this went on for a while, Covey and the other passengers were getting more and more irritated. And finally, Stephen Covey turned to the man and said, "Sir, your children are really disturbing people. Can you try to do something about it?" And the man lifted his head and opened his eyes as if to come to consciousness of the situation for the first time. And he softly said, "Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. I guess I should do something about it. I'm sorry. We just came from the hospital. Their mother died about an hour ago. I don't know how to think. I don't know what to do, and I guess they don't know how to handle it either." You can imagine how Stephen Covey felt. He probably wanted to stand up and say to the kids, "Shout some more! Let's all start throwing things." Because Covey saw things differently. He came to understand these people and their situation. He would later say that his heart was filled with this man's pain. Feelings of sympathy and compassion flowed freely after he learned of their situation. Perhaps that's one reason Jesus told people never to judge. Because we rarely know the full story, do we? One day the disciples come to Jesus, and John comes up to him and says, "Teacher, we saw someone casting out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because he was not following us." In other words, he's not playing on our team. He's of a different denomination, a different religion, a different nationality. He didn't talk like us. He didn't look like us. In fact, he was not us. What are we going to do about it? Do not stop him, Jesus says. Don't bother him. Whoever is not against us is for us. Now, we only have a couple of sentences written down in the Bible about this interesting event. But don't you know that Jesus had more to say to his disciples about it? We just got the Cliff Notes version. Fellas, why are you judging this man? Did you spend any time with him? Did you get to know his story? Why would you judge him? It's okay if he's not with us. It's okay if he's not on our team. He's trying to do a good thing. We may not be of the same mind, but we can be of the same heart. Now, that last line I just gave you was actually a quote of John Wesley's. It's a good one for us to remember. We may not be of the same mind, but we can be of the same heart. But I want to add to it, or turn it around a little. It's a whole lot easier to be of the same heart if we understand each other's mind. If we understand why people do what they do, why people believe what they believe. For there's a reason for everything we do. Why we believe what we believe, why we do what we do. Sometimes it's because of our DNA. I often like to remind people that we have all kinds of ancestors swimming around in our gene pool and our cesspool, right? And the other main reason we believe what we believe and what we do is because of our environment, our experiences. Like the family that came onto the subway. We often do things because of something that's happened to us, something we've experienced. We're shaped by what country we live in. We're shaped by what state we've been raised in, by what city, by what neighborhood, by what family, by what church. That all shapes us. And a zillion other environmental things too. What skin color we are, what friends we have, what professors you have, what classes you're taking. It all affects us and shapes us. How much money you have, what kind of job you have. My father died when I was 4 years old. You don't think I have a little separation anxiety from time to time? It all shapes us. And so with our different DNA and our different life experiences, guess what? We're going to think differently. That's just the way it is. It's the way it's always been. It's the way it will always be. The question is, will we strive to understand one another? Will we have an understanding heart? You see, that's the only way we can have a more loving and peaceful world, a more loving and peaceful country, a more loving and peaceful city, a more loving and peaceful family, a more loving and peaceful marriage, is to take time to make the effort to understand one another. And there's only one way to understand someone, only one way. That's to listen to them, to learn about them. Although we want people to listen to us, to understand us, we often fail to listen to others. I think if Jesus could come back today, if he could tell us one thing, it would be say, hey, love one another, serve one another, and listen to each other, which does not come easy. It's an art form. It's a muscle that has to be developed, so we have to work at being good listeners. That's what will transform our lives and what will transform the world. And folks, you folks who are getting out of college and going into the world, that's, I think, one of the biggest things for you to focus on, to listen to other people, to get to understand them. I bet 80% of the sermons preached in our country today will mention Pope Francis. And what a wonderful week. As Jan mentioned, we started off with International Day of Peace, and then came Francis, and what a wonderful breath of fresh air. As I watched the stories and reports about him and his travels, one word kept popping up: the word mercy. That Francis is so much about offering mercy, compassion, understanding. And then one of the quotes by Francis that's been getting a lot of press, Jan mentioned it in her prayer. He said, priests should be shepherds living with the smell of the sheep. Priests should be shepherds living with the smell of the sheep. And I think Francis wouldn't mind me expanding that a little. I think Christians should be shepherds living with the smell of the sheep. All Christians should be seeking to understand people, to listen to people, to learn about them, to hear their story. That's living with the smell of the sheep. That's how you have understanding. That's how you have compassion. That's how you have mercy. And listening is something active. And sometimes we have to be proactive. We have to ask questions. We have to do research in order to understand someone. So Randy Kennedy, Tricia Richardson, and I are standing in the parking lot of the Lorraine Hotel, which has been turned into a museum. We decided not to go inside the National Civil Rights Museum, which consisted of the hotel and 2 other buildings. I was so overwhelmed by what I had experienced, just standing in the parking lot, reading the plaques, being at the spot where this great life had been taken. I didn't think my heart could take much more. And so we started walking back to our van. And we noticed something sitting right outside of the parking lot, a tent, a tarp or something. Someone was camped out under a tarp with a bunch of protest signs around them. Great, I thought. Some racists are out here protesting the shrine to Dr. King. I can't believe they have the nerve to be right where he was shot. How awful. Then I realized that the person I saw under the tarp was an African American woman. Okay, I thought, maybe the protesters aren't racist, but what are they protesting for? Why would they be protesting against Dr. King? I mean, you can't do anything good these days without someone being upset about it. And so as we were about to get in the van, Tricia saw a security guard standing in the parking lot, and Tricia, who is not the shyest person in the world, said, "Wait a minute, I'm going over to the security guard and see if he knows what they're doing over there and why they're protesting." And as she's doing that, I'm looking over there. It was a hot day, and the woman protester was cooking in the sun. I didn't see how she could stand it. After about 5 minutes, Tricia came back and told us that it's just one woman protesting, and that the security guard thinks that she is a very nice and pleasant woman, and that she's very smart. He said that the woman doesn't think they should be making money off of Dr. King's death. And then the guard said, "You know, she's got a point." Well, that response surprised me. And so I decided to do more listening and more questioning via the internet. I searched "Woman Protesting National Civil Rights Museum." The first 20 sites that popped up on my computer were about a woman named Jackie Smith. Do you know how long Jackie Smith has been sitting there outside of that parking lot protesting? A long time. For 27 years and 133 days, that spot has basically been Jackie's home. I would read on to learn that Jackie used to be the night manager and the very last tenant of the Lorraine Hotel. She was evicted when the site was bought to make it into the Civil Rights Museum. They had to haul her off. They put her right outside of the parking lot. 27 years ago. Jackie thinks the hotel should be used to help the poor and the marginalized. She believes that's what Dr. King would want. So she has signs that read things like, "Stop worshiping the past, start living the dream," "Poverty is violence," Boycott the Civil Rights Museum, and she's crossed out the word rights and has substituted the word wrong, the Civil Wrong Museum. She points out that the reason Dr. King came to Memphis that day, where he was heading as he stepped out of the hotel room before he was shot, was to go to an event to support sanitation workers. Jackie loved Dr. King, and she firmly believes that what she is doing is what Dr. King would want her to do. Personally, I think the museum is doing something to help the poor and marginalized, as it helps remind people like me of the evils of racism and what we've done in our country, and reminds us of those who have worked hard and sacrificed for the rights of others, and that others of us need to do likewise. But you know, Jackie has a point too. And I think it's actually pretty cool that on this important site that represents Dr. King, there is room for different voices to be heard. That right there on the grounds, people experience what so much of what Dr. King's life was about. We may not be of the same minds, but we can be of the same heart. And so let us leave this place today determined to listen to one another, to understand each other. It will transform your relationships. It will transform the world. Amen and amen.